I was feeling really inspired after giving that talk I gave a few hours ago. So I wanted to put out some practical tips on how you can transform your life no matter where you find yourself right now. So no matter if you're overweight, perhaps you're in a relationship you're unhappy with, maybe you're wanting a relationship, maybe you're financially feeling lost. I felt really invigorated after giving that talk and speaking some words of faith into your life that I wanted to follow up with some practical steps that you can begin to take tonight and moving forward into the week to get things moving in a direction differently than perhaps they have been going. For you who may not know me, I was 360 pounds as a kid. I certainly didn't come from a history that would predict the situation I now enjoy. I was bullied, teased. I had no real sense of myself. I always felt different. And the difference that I felt wasn't because of something I knew within, but rather because I had put other people's opinion of me ahead of my own. Have you done that? Have you let other people's opinions really be the thing that define you or define the way that you're looking at your life? I was one of those people. I would subjugate my own authority for that of others. And being sensitive and having interests that were different than many of the young men my own age at that time, I found it very easy to buy into the negative, limiting, hateful messages that were all around me. If you can relate to this, and this video is particularly for you, it wasn't until later that I got to the place where I recognized that if I wanted my life to be better, I was going to have to step out in faith and enlarge the vision I had of myself. I think the only way we can really be successful is stepping into our own identity. And that means knowing ourselves well enough to trust that we can handle the response, the reaction that other people have to who we are as people. And in order to do that, we have to actually take time to recognize that the people we may have been listening to all along growing up, for many of us, it's our parents or the people that raised us, while well-intentioned in many cases, were wrong. And they perhaps were even sincere. But sincerity doesn't mean right or correct. So the first step to really taking charge of your life is starting to appreciate and accept who you are as a person in spite of what you may have been told about yourself growing up. If much of what was said about you was more about your liabilities than your assets, if more was said about limits that your environment was going to pose on your future, it's time to replace all of that with faith. It's time to expand your horizons by starting to see yourself in a way differently than anyone may have seen you before. And that means inspiring yourself with things that are going to help you see beyond your current situation. The first step in transformation that I teach all of my clients is to have a vision, have a set of goals, have a very clear, specific, well-defined set of aims that are going to call you forward through all the inevitable adversities that we face when we're embarking on our own heroic journeys. To do that means that we have to sit down, take time to actually imagine what our lives could look like. If you're in a situation where you're surrounded with people who aren't living life on their own terms, who feel that they are victim of circumstance or victims of their history, you're not going to be able to take the steps necessary to move yourself forward. So the first thing is to surround yourself with people who are going to constructively invest into who you are, and more than define you, are going to make room for you. I think that's the greatest gift a healthy relationship can give, is making space for you to blossom into all that you stand to become. And I don't know, frankly, in my own spiritual journey, if we ever, at least in one lifetime, will discover all that we possibly can be. One of my teachers early on said it this way, and it struck me. He said, getting to know yourself is much like getting to know the city you live in. Who you are as a person is as expansive as the planet Earth. The best any of us could ever hope to do is become about as familiar with ourselves as we can the city we live in. So just think about that for a second. Just stop and think about how much is condensed and packed into that simple few sentences. You're more than you even can ever grow into understanding. There's so much potential in you. And I think what scares a lot of people from becoming all of who they are is the sense that they're going to be so different, they're not going to be loved, that they're going to outgrow the people who are around them, the people who've always been there. And true loving relationships make room for all of us. Unfortunately, fear keeps many from ever having the opportunity to be fully loved, simply because, again, as children, many of us believe love is conditional, that to be loved requires we meet a certain set of expectations, many of which are never very well defined by the people that we would hope to be loved by. As adults, our task is having a vision of how our life will look such that most of the love that we need to thrive in life comes from within, also from something greater than ourselves, from God. And then the remainder, of course, comes from those relationships which are important to us. But if you're always looking for what you need from without, you're going to find yourself always falling up short. So it's incredibly important to recognize that to fully actualize, to fully become all that you can be, requires a certain fertilization of sorts of your own. And that means doing for yourself now what you wish would have been done earlier. It means being for yourself now who you would have hoped you would have had in your life at an earlier stage. I have so many clients that come in and they're grieving what hadn't been done by someone they believe should have done it for them. Maybe it was their parent, maybe it was their spouse, and they're missing out on who's come in their life because they're focused on who's no longer there. So someone new has come in, something new has come into their life to enlarge the picture of their life, but they're so caught up in regret and anger over what's past, they're not able to move forward into what's to come. Is that where you are? Have you been lamenting things that have left your life, perhaps for a good cause? Maybe there's a reason things have left your life, and maybe that's to get space available for the things that are now in your life. In my own life, I'll give you a wonderful example, a story. In 2013, it was the start of an entirely new chapter of my life. Little did I know. On December 6, 2013, my father died unexpectedly at age 54. That same day, a girl who later I would go on to marry came into my life, having conversated virtually over the computer and phone and everything. She would come into my life that day and my father would leave it. It was quite a trial by fire for that woman at the time, Crystal, who's now my wife, given she would come in and see me at one of the most vulnerable times in my life, the unexpected loss of my father. My mom was very sick, and my father was the type of guy who had other people in my family fully dependent on him, my mother included, and I'm the oldest of three. So all those responsibilities quickly fell onto my shoulders. If I would have gotten caught up in what was leaving, that was my father, was passing into what comes after this, I would have missed the blessing that God had placed in my life with my soon-to-be wife, soon to be a few years later, obviously. So you've got to make certain that when one thing is taken, often something new is brought in. But if you're not making room for that something new because you're so focused on what's closed, again, you're never going to have the opportunity to fulfill the vision that you deserve and perhaps desire. I'd always known that I wanted an incredibly meaningful relationship with a wonderfully attractive woman. And by attractive, I don't just mean physically. My wife certainly is physically attractive, but I mean attractive in the deepest of ways. Emotionally attentive, appreciative, accepting, affectionate, a person who is self-trusting and where there's no question about either of our intentions. And I could have very likely missed that opportunity if I would have allowed the swell of grief that was natural in the wake of my father's death blind me to the gift God had brought into my life. So I think it's very important, very, very important, that we all come to terms with the notion that there's a reason that everything is happening for you. Even in the most troubling of times and the most difficult of times, there's a reason that these things are occurring. And so often that spirals people into fights with themselves over faith and why or how a God could exist in times like those. And I'm not here to try to simplify that. I think that that's a question that each of us has to reflect on and contemplate. But I can tell you from my own experience that having a vision ahead of time, ahead of the adversity, makes it possible to more clearly see opportunities when they come up. You don't need to know how something's going to come about. You just have to have a very compelling why. I always teach 3 steps to my clients in achieving any particular outcome. In many of the cases of those come to seek my coaching, it's for physical transformation, weight loss. And the first thing we talk about are the results. What are the aims? What are the outcomes? So you have to start with the end in mind. You need to have a clear picture of that vision, how you want your life to look. At 360 pounds, growing up in the city of St. Louis, my father owned a janitorial company. My mother was struggling with alcoholism and prescription drug abuse. She was in and out of the hospital more times than I can count. I am blessed that I have somehow developed a capacity for selective amnesia because I don't remember much of the trauma that I'm certain I had experienced as a kid growing up around that type of insanity. But God's grace was ever present through all of that. Not one time through any of that did I have fear of losing my mother until I became a man, until I was in college. And then it became very apparent that the choices my mother was making could very likely terminate her life prematurely. But I recognized that if I wanted my life to change, the only way it was going to do so was if I changed. And so as a young person, I decided I was going to have to take charge of every possible thing that I could take charge of in terms of the way my life was going. And it started with my physical health. I mean, we have to have a strong, vital platform to work from. And if we don't have energy, if we don't have vitality, if our minds aren't clear, if we can't focus, if we don't have a sense of ourselves making progress towards something, it's going to be very difficult to attempt more challenging tasks as time unfolds. So I always recommend that you have a vision for yourself and that it starts with you. So you don't need to work on changing your parents. You don't need to work on changing your history. You don't need to work on changing your spouse. You don't need to work on changing your job. You don't need to work on changing your church. You don't need to work on changing your neighborhood. You've got to work on changing you. You've got to start with this. When you can get the interior cleaned up, when you can get your inner world cleaned up, you'd be amazed at how the outer world becomes a reflection of that. It's certainly been my experience. So as a kid, 360 pounds, I couldn't, this sounds exaggerated, but it's really not. I couldn't pay a person to go out on a date with me as a boy. I had my sister, God bless her, tried to set me up on dates with young girls, and I was always just very different. I wasn't looking for superficiality, and at that stage of life, most people are interested in things other than deep existential conversation. And I never was that type of person. Not to mention, I was 360 pounds, right? So I didn't have the things in my favor to predict that down the road I would meet a wonderful woman that would possess every possible equity I could have ever hoped for in a partner, and so many more. And I'm here to tell you it's possible for you too. But when I began my journey, the real life-changing journey, only started when I stopped trying to get from without what I need to give within. I couldn't look for a woman to love me until I loved myself. I couldn't look for someone to invest in me until I invest in myself. So real life change happens when you start to be for yourself who you have always wanted in your life. It's not becoming so self-serving that you don't have room for a relationship by any stretch. But it's recognizing that the healthiest of relationships are those relationships wherein you're doing for yourself all that you can possibly do to be as healthy and as capable, so that when you do go to a relationship, if a relationship is part of this vision we're talking about, you're going from a place of abundance, not coming from a place of need. And when I coach people on issues unrelated to their weight, relationship, career, what other aims they may bring to me, I can't tell you the number of people that come to me and they're leading with need. Anytime you're leading with need in anything, whether it be a professional relationship or a personal relationship, you're going to find yourself often in trouble in one way or another down the road. You've got to come to a relationship not looking to get, but rather to give. And you have to have in your mind that type of reciprocity as part of this vision I'm talking about with you. So the first step, to recap, in taking charge of your life and beginning to turn things around is to create that vision and not allow your current situation or the definitions that have been imposed upon you by authorities to be the way that you look at your life having to go. There is nothing, one of the greatest gifts my parents, my mother particularly, ever gave me. I was incredibly close to my mom until she started to fall prey to abusing alcohol and other drugs when I was about, probably guess 9, 10, or 11 years old. Was my mother instilled in me this belief that there was nothing that was impossible if I had committed myself to it, any aim I had. And if you saw pictures of the home that I grew up in as a boy, in fact, the apartment I grew up in initially, and then my parents got a little shotgun house in the city, and eventually moved into the house that I spent most of my youth in, you would never imagine that I would go on to have been as blessed and as successful as I have. And I owe that, much of it, to the lessons that I was able to glean from those early experiences. It instilled in me a tremendous hunger to become more. And I think each of us that go through incredible adversity are given that gift, that hunger, that desire. And if we don't allow the beliefs, the fear of those around us to halt us from taking consistent action towards those things which we feel in our spirit we're called to, the sky's the limit. And I was very blessed as a boy in the most formative years of my life to have that ingrained in me, to have that belief ingrained in me. So that raises a very important point that I want to make. Be very careful as to what you're ingesting. Often consumption is a big part of my clients' transformation, right? What they're eating. But what you're eating doesn't just mean what you're taking in through your mouth. You want to think about what you're ingesting in terms of what you're ingesting psychologically. What are you allowing to influence your thinking? What are you allowing to influence your feeling? What are you reading? What are you listening to? Who are you talking to most frequently? All these things are having profound impacts on you, whether or not you're measuring them. They're altering you. They're shaping you, if you will. And if you're not careful, they can shape you into becoming someone you never intended to be. So who are you spending time with? Who have you talked to today? Who have you talked to this past week? How many people have you met with in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks who are living a life like that which you desire and deserve to live? And I don't mean that they just have all the accoutrements of success, that they have fancy cars, fancy homes, wealth. Those things are wonderful for those that have them. But I mean, these are people that you're spending time with that are living a principled life, that are living in the present, that are actually with the people that they're with. You know, you can be physically with someone, but not emotionally there. And I'm sure you know what I mean. You can be sitting next to someone and not even be there, particularly in the age now of technology with cell phones, iPads, so many different screens that can take us out of where we are, at least psychically, while our bodies still remain there. So you've got to ask yourself what you're allowing to influence your belief system. That belief system, what's going on between here, is going to have more to do with what's going on out here in your world than anything else. I believe that your mindset, I believe that your psychology is a major determinant of whether or not you succeed or fail in becoming all that you're capable of being. And it starts with having an incredibly clear vision of what you want your life to look like. Now, that vision will change in time. As you grow, as you mature, some of the goals that you have no longer will be as relevant to you. Some of the things that were very important at one time or another will seem trivial as you get older. And some things will never change. Some things you'll always want. As a kid, one of my major goals, having transformed my life, was to spread my message as far and as wide as I possibly could. And the best platform to do that from was the Oprah Winfrey Show. So I had this dream when I was a kid that I would have an opportunity to share my story on Oprah's show. And I did everything possible. Faith is such a huge ingredient in success, but you have to couple that faith with action. So you can't just believe it and imagine it's going to happen. There's too many people out there that are preaching this idea that if you just pray, that it's going to happen. I'm here to tell you, God isn't going to do for you what you can do for yourself. And that's worth writing down. God is not going to do the things that we have the capacity to do for ourselves. We have to take it upon ourselves to do all that we possibly can to enable our own progress and leave the rest to those forces that are outside of our awareness. I call it grace. And I think when we do all that we can, focusing on being loving and kind and effective, certain forces are set, are awakened, that come to our aid and kind of conspire for our development and our growth. And so are you doing everything that you can to close the gap between where you are and the vision that you have for your life? And if you haven't been, now's the time to start. Now's the time to sit down and clearly delineate what your life's going to look like. Where do you want to live? How do you want to feel? How do you want to look? Who do you want to spend time with? What type of income do you want to be able to generate? And through what means? What contribution, what are the skills that you have that could have a tremendously positive impact on the marketplace, on society? Obviously, you're a valuable soul, but to be paid, you have to bring value to society. And so you've got to think about, if I want an extraordinary income, how can I have an extraordinary impact on people? And if you have an extraordinary impact on 1 or 2 people, you can make a living. If you make an extraordinary impact on many, 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 many people, you can have an extraordinary income. So you want to start to understand these philosophies. They seem at times perhaps trite. They sound like just axioms that are thrown out there. But if you take time to really reflect on these things, these are the things that can change your life. If you'll begin to hold to a principled set of actions, a routine, you'd be amazed at how your life changes. So I recognized as a kid with that dream of meeting Oprah that there were a lot of forces that were against me. I mean, how many people were trying to get on the Oprah Winfrey show when her show was at the height of its fame, right? But it didn't stop me. I sent email after email. I would go to FedEx after work before they would close, before their last shipment would go out. And I would send pictures and handwritten letters. And I once had a brainstorming session with a buddy of mine, and I thought about releasing thousands of balloons in an effort to get Oprah Winfrey's attention miles away from her studio in Chicago. That never happened because I think we happened upon some type of law that I could have been fined. And at that time, I certainly didn't want to have to pay some type of fine for something like that. But nonetheless, the point I'm making is that when you set your heart afire with a compelling vision, the ideas will start to flow to you. And you don't want to take a no as anything other than one step closer to the fulfillment of your ultimate aim. And you've got to develop the capacity spiritually of discernment. Discernment, for those of you who may not be particularly religious, is kind of like what other people may think of as intuition. It's knowing without having data, having a sense, having a gut feeling kind of about someone, something, some opportunity, something that just, you don't have rational evidence for the feeling you're having, but something just tells you that this is either the right or the wrong course of action. And that takes time and, again, maturity, lots of experience to refine so that it actually is something that aids you and doesn't block you from your development. So as that kid that kept sending letters to Oprah, and I got close so many times to being on the show, but it never came to fruition. Eventually, I continued to stay true to my real mission, my core mission of service, of spreading my message of hope, of strategy, of inspiration to as many people as possible. And I just looked at it as another way that if it was intended, if it was part of the plan for my life, it would ultimately come to pass. Well, little did I know, 15 years later, having been married, having published 2 books, having helped lots of people, having garnered endorsements from like President Bill Clinton, all those things happened independent of ever being on Oprah Winfrey's show. And I come across an opportunity to go and attend an event that she was giving. And my wife and I got tickets. My wife happens to be from California. And lo and behold, as many of you might have known from following my work, I brought my materials, my picture, and my story, and a copy of my book to Los Angeles, where Oprah was to be putting on this event. And she certainly took note of me there in the audience and gave me an opportunity to share my story. Some 15 years, almost 16 years after the original kind of idea dawned on me that I wanted to do that. 16 years is what it took for me to get my message to Oprah Winfrey. I had an opportunity like no other. I got to share my story in front of 14,000 people there, but it was not with any attachment. I simply went into it knowing that I was going to have a great time at the event, and if it happened, great. And I think a healthy detachment from what things are going to mean to you and your ego is incredibly essential to the fulfillment of some of these things we're talking about, these goals that you might have for yourself. So staying mission-centric, staying focused on having an impact, being effective in the lives of the people that you're touching with whatever your particular gifts are. I think that's an incredible and important part of actually bringing from yourself and bringing to yourself the opportunities that are not only going to enhance your life, but are going to enhance the lives of others and enhance your mission, like they have mine. So mission, vision, those two elements, step one. Step two is patience. It's being comfortable with having to change the timeline you might have in mind. Everything has a gestation period. Unfortunately, in today's society, we live in a culture where we want everything instantaneously. And that's just not the way that life works. And as an amateur coach, when I was much, much younger, I was particularly attached to how I was doing and how my clients were doing when I was coaching people on weight loss. So if progress wasn't consistent, if progress wasn't happening every week or 2 weeks, whatever, it would lead to frustration on my part, their parts, usually both of our parts. And I recognized, fortunately, in time, that transformation and change has an element of timing to it. And it's an element of timing we all bring to it. We all bring to change our own history, our own capacities, our own limitations. I think part of maturity is recognizing that we all do have certain limitations. While all things are possible through God, certainly humans are limited. And we have to make room for that. We have to make room for the notion that we shouldn't be contrasting ourselves or comparing ourselves to other people. We shouldn't be seeing ourselves any better or worse than other people. We should see ourselves as yet just another human with a unique set of gifts, but also a unique set of limitations, a unique set of idiosyncrasies, things that are weird, things that are different, things that perhaps aren't mainstream. Some of us more than others, right? So I think having patience can be applied to having patience with yourself, having patience for the process, having patience for the people in your life, recognizing that no one achieves success alone. Arnold Schwarzenegger, my wife and I, about a year and a half ago, I think, were invited to his home. And I only say it because it impresses me. I don't say it to impress you, but it really impressed me that this one-time 360-pound kid was being invited to Arnold Schwarzenegger's backyard for a party. Quite the difference, as I said earlier, right? But when you have a compelling mission, you'd be surprised where that takes you. Anyway, we were there with Arnold Schwarzenegger. There were many others there. Sylvester Stallone was there. Jason Statham was there. I was just in awe of the entire experience. And I remember when we met Arnold, he said the one thing he would never say about himself was that he was a self-made man. And that really struck me. He said that he had many mentors, many advisors, many coaches, many people that now he stands on the shoulder of stuff. And I think it takes a tremendous amount of maturity and humility to be able to recognize that truth. I think it feels much more marketable and compelling to act as if you can do it all alone. I think that relationships are the ultimate resource. And in relationship, one equity we all need to cultivate is patience. It certainly hasn't been my strongest suit over my life, but I've gotten better as I've gotten older with that idea. And I think we can get better with patience by looking at everything that irritates us or that challenges us as an opportunity to grow in our patience, an opportunity to develop more compassion. I heard it said once that if you can begin to think about your mind and yourself as a little toddler filled with joy and exuberance and curiosity about the world, being walked on a sidewalk to a particular destination. And occasionally this little toddler gets so excited that he runs off of the sidewalk into the yard to smell the grass and feel the grass and pull flowers and all this type of thing, despite being told to stay on the sidewalk. And the path to really learning to be compassionate and loving with yourself is the same path or the same approach you would take with that child. You would calmly bring the child back and continue forward without scolding, without being abusive or mean, but just have an appreciation for what the innate curiosity of a child brings forth in terms of behaviors. And I think if we can maintain an appreciation for that part of ourselves, we can find a lot of fulfillment and joy in everyday life. But we get so bogged down with things that we just become irritable and we become edgy, and things aren't happening at the rate that we'd like them to happen. We're not where we see other people seem to be on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, right? So the idea is cultivating patience. Recognizing anything that's meaningful is going to take time. I am so grateful that none of the early relationships in my life worked out, because if they had, I wouldn't have had space for my wife. But if I would have thought when all those things were playing out that I'm not good enough, that I'm not intended for a relationship, that I'm not lovable, which ultimately at a very deep level, you're telling yourself when you are being self-abusive and being critical of yourself. You've got to reflect and become an observer of your own thinking, an observer of the thoughts that you're energizing. You've got to step back and ask yourself, obviously this voice that you may hear that puts you down all the time now is your own, but you weren't born with that voice. So you've got to ask yourself, where does that voice really come from? And where did you pick up these beliefs that have been limiting you for so long? Well, the surefire answer, if you're one of the many who would respond to that question with what I hear most commonly in my office every single week, I don't know, the clue is follow that thread back to your early life. And that's usually where it started. It usually starts before you possess the cognitive abilities you now do, before you were aware of the inner resources you now have, before you had the incredible stockpile of defenses that you possess now as an adult. These things you got impregnated with these things. Your mind was kind of an open vessel, and there wasn't anything filtering out what was true and what wasn't, because as children, obviously, we're very dependent. We have to be. Our survival, in fact, hinges on the good and adequate care of our parents, or in the absence of our parents, the people that are there to take care of us, our guardians. And so we don't often question as children the validity or the actuality, legitimacy of the things that we're picking up. So you've got to become doubtful of your doubts. That's a good way of saying it. You've got to become doubtful of your doubts about yourself. And I also teach my clients to become detached from labels and detached from trying to fit into certain boxes that those people that they love, but they've also dispossessed a lot of their own authority into. You've got to let go of the need for their approval and substitute their approval with your own. I think that anything that is human is worth accepting about yourself. And that's quite a profound statement to make. I don't mean that it's acceptable in the sense of abusive behavior that we're all capable of. But I think it's important to know that all that you see in every other person, even the people that you consider enemies or those that you despise, is in you. And you need to become aware of that. To not can lead to incredible folly and it can make you incredibly foolish, because you're lacking self-awareness. And that's probably one of the most, I would say not the most, I would say it is the most dangerous aspect of being human. I think a lack of self-awareness leads people to become incredibly brutal, and it starts with themselves. And if you're willing to tolerate brutality yourself, you're certainly not going to find it very difficult to be brutal to other people. So all that's to say, you have to cultivate patience with the fulfillment and the expression of the vision you have, but not be too attached to it showing up the way that you thought it would. I ultimately got the opportunity to share my story with Oprah. I've had the opportunity to meet all sorts of people. But it was only after I put the accent on mission, not on what things would mean to me. I'm sure after losing the weight that I lost when I was a kid, that I would have felt incredibly significant and important, given that I never felt like I fit in, but because I'm on the Oprah Winfrey Show. So I'm sure there was quite a bit of an ego in that. I'm sure it would have been quite the ego trip for me when I was much younger to have achieved that. And perhaps that's part of the reason it didn't happen. So I think you have to recognize that things are going to happen for you in due time. I think it's very important not to dismiss small beginnings, no matter if you come from a family like I came from. I mean, literally, my father, I think he got his GED, perhaps. My mom as well. I didn't come from a college-educated background. I looked like an alien in my family. I was so different than the people around me. And looking back, it was a tremendous blessing. I was a challenge to a person like my dad, who was very gruff and certainly didn't have the expansive vocabulary that I feel very blessed to have had a privilege to develop. But I think if you can find a way to appreciate even the most difficult things, and also to find humor in the things you're going through, it's the only thing that got us, my siblings and I, through those incredibly difficult times. That was an incredible vision for a life beyond that which we were experiencing. Faith that it was possible, and that faith was engendered by people we spent a lot of time with. I was incredibly blessed. A woman walked into my life who I felt prepared me for life with my wife. Her name was Miss White. She was in her 70s at the time, and she became like a mother, grandmother to me. If you read my book, Inner Guru, I talk extensively about the relationship I have with her. But again, blessings come in ways you wouldn't suspect, and from people you wouldn't suspect. So you have to have an openness to that. And I think I wouldn't have had that openness for these pieces to fall in place if I hadn't already had this belief that with commitment, anything was possible, that I was very fortunate. It was drilled into me as a boy from my mom, and from the work ethic, in full disclosure, from my father. He worked tirelessly at a huge expense. And that's something you want to think about, to go back to vision, is you want to make sure that the things you're after don't cost you too much in your life. My father certainly was able to provide his family with security, was able to provide his children with an incredible education. He and my mother had an arrangement where she stayed home and raised us when we were children, but he never was there. And that certainly left a hole in terms of a model for what a healthy relationship would look like. For one, I didn't have much of a relationship with my father, other than the superficiality of him coming and going. So there was that. That was certainly something I had to fill with other men in my life growing up. Neighborhood men that were fatherly to me, uncles, relatives, my grandfather, mentors as I got older. So you have to recognize everything that you're doing is coming at a price. Not only a price to you, but a price to those you love. My mother, and I certainly never hold anyone responsible for the feelings or the choices another adult makes, but I do want to provide context. My mother started to drink excessively. She came from a history of alcoholism, so it wasn't something that was just engendered because of a poor relationship with my father. And she could have known better. But she certainly became more vulnerable to this predisposition, given that she didn't have the type of meaningful relationship that a marriage is intended to provide. So you want to make sure when you're setting goals and you have a vision that you're considering the cost all these things are going to posit on your life and the lives of those who matter most to you. If you don't, you're going to end up with a tremendous amount of regret. And I don't know if there's any more greater pain than that. When you know that you could have done something that would have been beneficial, but you didn't, and a part of you knew that you should have. That's a hard pill to swallow, and it's one I fortunately have not had to. And I'm encouraging you to stop tonight here in the evening and ask yourself if what you're after is coming at too high of a price. Is it costing too much? Is it costing you your marriage? Is it costing you your state of mind, your peace of mind? The one thing that society slowing down has allowed all of us to recognize is things were moving awfully fast. And you've got to wonder if that's really good for any of us. I choose peace of mind over a bigger income. I choose peace of mind and a healthy marriage over wider reach. But each of us have to come to what matters to us and what we feel is meaningful and what we feel is part of our unique destiny, right? So having patience for yourself means recognizing that it's going to take time to become all that you're destined to be. Things aren't always going to look or come to you in the way you expect. But by having an openness to the gifts God's given you, you put yourself in a position to benefit greatly. So step 2 is, of course, patience. Step 3 is routine. When people ask me, how can I start to change my life now? Simple. Consistency. You can't dabble in this type of thing. This isn't something that you can just dip your toe in and then expect yourself to be able to go back to what's comfortable. Success isn't comfortable. Achievement isn't comfortable. People look from the outside into the life of someone like me or the life of someone who they admire or aspire to be like, and they only see what's going on externally. They don't see the price, as I was just referencing, that many of the achievements come at. I mean, you're talking, I have the privilege of working with Fortune 100 company CEOs, coaching them, and I hear the cost on their personal life, accruing that type of wealth and the responsibilities that come with that and the danger that comes with that, the threats that they get, the lawsuits they deal with. I mean, everyone sees the headline, but no one sees what's going on at home. No one sees what's going on in that person's inner world. So you have to stop and really ask yourself, am I seeing the whole picture? And if you want the things that you believe, if you want things to make you happy, I think you're setting yourself up in such a way that you're never going to win. I don't think I could put it any better than that, actually. Nothing's going to make you happy until you recognize happiness isn't an achievement, it's a state of being. So it's a way of processing reality. It's a way of discovering meaning and fulfillment in everyday life. It's learning how to not take yourself so seriously and not take your life so seriously. And a lot of success is a spiritual process. Business, I think, is a spiritual process. I mean, it's all about contribution, creating something bigger than yourself. I think the only time people get into real trouble is when they over-identify with the role they're in. So they start to see themselves as a business leader or a doctor or a lawyer or a politician or whatever, a millionaire, billionaire, whatever, and they forget that they're human. Each of us are humans who have many different roles that we may fit into play, however you want to think about it. And I think as soon as you lose sight of that, you start a very dangerous dynamic of feeling that you can never get enough, because really you're not in the role you're supposed to be in. You're not supposed to be in that role all the time. You're supposed to be a human who can move into these different arenas freely. But anytime you get fixed in one way, I think is when you run into trouble. So that's where the Buddhist teaching of detachment comes into play, where you're never too attached to one thing or another. It doesn't mean that you're not fully appreciative and incredibly grateful for every single moment that presents itself. But it's being here now. It's being where you are. It's not being in the future. It doesn't mean not having an intelligent, adult-like, mature plan and being responsible and just saying, well, 10 years from now, I'll figure out how to pay for my kids' college education. It's not like that. It's not being attached or over-identifying with the fulfillment of any particular aim. And that's incredibly difficult spiritual work. It requires a lot of trust. It requires a lot of faith. To get there, in my estimation, in my experience, requires an intelligent routine. And that's what I help people with every day, is developing a routine for themselves where doing what's going to bring them to the life that they want to create becomes automatic. They're not having to think about the actions they're taking much. They know ahead of time, it's practiced, and it becomes such an unconscious competency that it's automatic. So in regard to those that seek my coaching for physical transformation, it's deciding upon a course of action so they know, here's what I'm going to do with food every day, here's what I'm going to do with exercise every day. There's no magical diet, there's no magical exercise program. It's just fundamental good habits that they remain consistent with. So it's not putting the accent on, let's lose 100 pounds in 5 months. If that happens, okay, that doesn't matter. What matters is, are you taking care of yourself every single day? Are you doing the very basic things that all of us need to do to feel our best? Are you getting adequate rest? Are you surrounding yourself with relationships that nourish you and that you get meaning from in nourishing them? Are you making certain that you're feeding your body? Are you showing your body the affection it deserves by moving it, by feeding it, by making certain that you know your numbers, that you're talking to your doctor, you know what your cholesterol is, you know what your blood pressure is, you know what your blood sugar is, you know where you are, so you know that this vehicle that's taking you everywhere is operating exactly the way it was intended to. And you have someone who's spent their life and made it a career to understand human physiology, helping you in that process and trying to get to the point where you're not symptomatic. So that is having a doctor on your team. Are you taking time to reflect on yourself? Are you taking time to process what's going on with you, with the relationships that matter? Are you holding yourself accountable to staying true to yourself? That's where the coaching comes in, right? So having a strategy is certainly an incredible part of it, and I help people with those things every day of the week. Accountability is another big part of it. And with coaching, it's shifting from the external accountability to a person like me to getting to the place where the true authority that you answer to is your own. And I think, unfortunately, people in the industry of fitness, of wellness, thrive on people that are looking for someone else to do the thinking for them or to be the person they need to become for themselves. And I work very hard such that my clients learn to develop interdependency. That is, they don't feel that they can't depend on anyone, but they learn that it's most important as an adult to learn to depend and trust in themselves. And then when they do experience gaps in their awareness, they have enough humility to reach outside of themselves to someone that they do trust and who has a reputation that connotes success and experience to fill that gap with the knowledge they may not possessed at that point, and then to install that in themselves and move their lives forward. The challenge with that is it puts all of us in touch with what we all fear most. What is that? Death. And you say, how do you make that jump? How does becoming your own authority put you in touch with the fear of death? Quite simply, because it removes your parents and everyone else that you may have ahead of you psychically out of line and puts you next. So now you have to face the existential challenge we all do in maturation, which is, I am solely responsible for my life, which means that I have to take that burden on my own shoulders. I have to carry the burden of responsibility for how my life's going to turn out. In other words, it's letting go of blame. It's no longer looking to blame anyone. It's making a decision that you're going to take it all on. You're going to ask life to bring it on, and you're going to trust yourself to handle everything that shows up. And if you look at any great story of antiquity or even more current stories, things like some of my favorites, right? Star Wars, one of my favorites, Harry Potter, all these great hero stories, they all follow that arc, right? They all follow this particular arc. And why do they resonate with millions and millions and millions of people? Because it's our story. It's your story. It's what you're called to do on this planet, to be your own hero, to embark on a mission of becoming more than your history predicted, aligning with assisting forces that grace brings into your life, installing from those forces the skills, the abilities that lie dormant in you, that are there, but become activated by the relationships with those that have more experience or who perhaps are further on their own journeys than you may experience yourself as being. Coming up against overwhelming opposition, things that you're scared are going to destroy you. I mean, you can think about it. Look at Star Wars, right? Look at Anakin's story, one of my favorite stories of all time. Hayden Christensen did a great job in that role, and there's talks now for my Star Wars fans that he might be reprising his role in one of the more current Star Wars series. Nonetheless, you look at a young boy who came from humble beginnings, who a mentor saw in him something he didn't really see in himself. And he was tutored. He was elevated to the ranks of a Jedi, a learned master, right? But he was confronted with choice. And that choice was to trust in his training and trust in those who had invested in his life, his teachers, and his girlfriend, Padme, and her belief in him, or allow fear to hijack him. And if you know the story, obviously you know that fear hijacked him and destroyed him. Not ultimately. I'm not going to spoil the whole story. But my point is that if you're not careful, fear can hijack you too. If you look at Harry Potter, the same thing. Now, fortunately, in the Harry Potter series, despite incredible opposition, Harry embraced the opposition, figuratively and literally, and fought him and overcame evil. And then when given the opportunity to have the power that was legendary, this Elder Wand, he broke it because he recognized that type of power does nothing but corrupt. So all that is to say that you were meant for greatness. Each of us is meant for greatness. You have a destiny. You're going to encounter all sorts of challenges. But you can trust that if you will allow yourself, through patience and through routine, having started with a vision for your life greater than where you are right now, you can get to where you deserve to be. So I went much longer than I had intended to tonight. But early in my life, I spent many a night watching YouTube videos and listening to seminars of those that I hope to one day be like. And while those men and women were sound asleep, my life was being impacted positively by the words, by the hope, by the faith that these people were emanating. So it's my hope for you tonight. It's my hope for you now, whatever time of day it is, for you that you've happened upon this video, that your life's been changed because of things I've said to you. I hope to hear from you. I hope that if something I've said tonight has really struck you, has really had an impact, that you reach out, that you go to my website, charlesdangelo.com, that you send me a message. If you need coaching, certainly you're more than welcome to reach out to my office via the website. But I'd love to hear from you. You can hit me up on Twitter. You can hit me up here on Facebook. You can hit me up on Instagram. I'm not all that often on any of those things because much of my mission is spent with clients one-on-one. And if you're wanting to be considered as a coaching client, certainly reach out. And my team can set up a time for me to evaluate whether or not that would make sense. And if it seems like it would, then perhaps we can move forward together. So my best to you, my best to your mission, and I look forward to hearing of all your success. God bless. Take care.